The Reset Trauma Model, scientific version for professionals. Integration of developmental trauma, parentification, and memory reconsolidation. 1. Introduction: Trauma as a structural developmental failure. The Reset model conceptualizes trauma not as a single event, but as a developmental structural collapse within the child's internal regulatory architecture. Specifically, trauma results from failure to internalize stability, paternal function; overactivation of safety regulation, maternal function; freezing of emotional memory, child identity. This creates a persistent dysregulation loop that mimics chronic hypervigilance. Parentification: attachment wounds, identity diffusion, maladaptive schema formation, interpersonal dysfunction. The Reset model synthesizes decades of trauma research into a unified framework. 2. The internal stability system, paternal function. This system corresponds primarily to prefrontal cortex development, boundary formation, affect regulation, executive functioning, the child's sense of protection and containment. When this system is inconsistent, unavailable, frightening, or absent, the child cannot internalize safety, the nervous system loses a key regulatory anchor. Long-term emotional stability, ventral vagal functioning, is compromised. This is often the overlooked origin of persistent trauma patterns. 3. The internal safety system, maternal function. This system corresponds to secure attachment, emotional mirroring, co-regulation, empathic responsiveness, the child's sense of emotional connection. When the mother or primary caregiver is overwhelmed, depressed, anxious, or burdened, the safety system becomes hyperactivated. The mother relies unconsciously on the child for emotional regulation. The child absorbs emotional states they cannot process. This leads to emotional parentification. 4. The double parentification trap. The Reset model identifies trauma's core as double parentification, which arises from the simultaneous failure of both internal systems. 4.1 Parentification Type 1, Stability parentification. Triggered by paternal dysfunction or absence. The child becomes responsible, self-suppressing, prematurely adult, boundaryless, hypervigilant. This is the child compensating for the missing paternal stability function. 4.2 Parentification Type 2, Emotional parentification. Triggered by maternal overwhelm. The child becomes caretaker, confidant, emotional regulator, mediator, therapist to the parent. This is the child compensating for compromised maternal safety function. 4.3 Consequence, identity collapse. The combination of both leads to role confusion, impaired emotional development, chronic self-sacrifice, inability to individuate, maladaptive attachment, increased risk of narcissistic or codependent patterns, trauma memory freeze, absence of adult identity formation. This triad is the origin of most complex trauma presentations. 5. Emotional memory freeze, developmental arrest. When both systems fail, the child's emotional development arrests. This manifests as implicit memory loops, unresolved stress cycles, fixation at developmental stages, chronic activation of defensive schemas, internalized shame and abandonment, trauma-based identity formation. Neuroscientifically, this maps to amygdala hypersensitivity, weakened PFC inhibition, dysregulated HPA axis, vagal shutdown under emotional overload, limbic imprinting of fear and hyper-responsibility, fragmented autobiographical memory. This frozen identity becomes the source of most adult trauma symptoms. 6. Why traditional trauma therapy often fails. Many therapeutic frameworks focus on emotional expression, soothing the inner child, cognitive reframing, self-compassion, attachment repair. These approaches activate the maternal safety system, but do not restore the missing paternal stability system. Without stability, safety cannot relax. Trauma cannot update. Emotional memory cannot reconsolidate. The child's self remains trapped. Identity cannot shift. The result is emotional relief, but not structural transformation. Reset addresses the missing piece. 7. Reset, a structural trauma resolution method. Reset equals regression for emotional stability and identity transition. Reset targets trauma at its root by restoring the full internal architecture. Step 1. Rebuilding the stability system, internal paternal function. During regression, the adult self is guided to embody grounded presence, emotional containment, assertive clarity, protective leadership, prefrontal regulation. This restores the missing internal structure that trauma blocked. This step alone often reduces hyperarousal and abandonment anxiety. Step 2. Relieving the overloaded safety system, internal maternal function. Once stability is re-established, the emotional system, limbic, relaxes. Hyperactivation decreases. Co-regulation becomes possible. The child no longer has to manage the mother's emotional burden. This step corrects decades of emotional parentification. Step 3. Releasing the child identity, emotional memory state. With both systems restored, the emotional memory becomes accessible. Reconsolidation begins. Implicit memory is updated to present-day safety. The child's self is guided out of the trauma environment. Identity matures into the integrated adult self. This creates a full identity transition out of the trauma state. 8. Neuroscientific mechanisms activated by reset. Memory reconsolidation updates emotional memory in real time. Prefrontal cortex re-engagement restores self-regulation and boundaries. Polyvagal state shift moves the nervous system into ventral vagal safety. Somatic completion finishes unresolved stress cycles. Attachment restructuring internalizes consistent paternal and maternal functions. Identity integration consolidates adult self as primary identity operator. Reset is therefore a unified framework combining developmental trauma, polyvagal theory, attachment theory, memory reconsolidation, parentification research, clinical identity formation science into a single therapeutic architecture. 9. The Unified Trauma Formula, scientific version. Trauma is the result of the child internalizing double parentification, compensating simultaneously for a failed stability system, paternal function, and an overloaded safety system, maternal function, leading to emotional memory freeze and arrested identity development. This formula explains the root of complex PTSD, codependency, narcissistic traits, empath overfunctioning, emotional reactivity, identity diffusion, trauma bonding, boundary collapse, chronic guilt and shame, fear of abandonment, developmental arrest. Reset resolves this architecture directly. If you'd like to know more, feel free to contact us via freakanari.com.